Thank you for coming out. My name is Dan. I am here on behalf of the Relevance team at Reddit to talk about our feed system and how we've introduced ML to it over the past year and a half or so. How many people here know what Reddit is? Can you raise your hand? Okay, at least a few of you. Okay, so I'm required to go through these slides. But for me, Reddit is a place of, if you're unfamiliar with it, a place of discussions and communities around any topic, interest, passion, hobbies that you may have. You can basically find anything on there. Our mission is to bring community and belonging to everyone, and we have a lot of people that use it on a regular basis. So, getting into the nitty-gritty. I've structured this talk in a sort of 3-act story format. This is totally an original idea of mine and not something that I got from Googling good presentation formats. But in all actuality, I do kind of like this because I want it to be more of a story and to keep in mind that there's people behind the things that do all this stuff, and that's really what makes or breaks a lot of projects, not tech. So we started our story in mid last year. I was transferring from the infrastructure team to the Relevance team. So of course that's where the story begins in my head. So as I'm joining, we have a few things going on. So we start with a really simple one, not very fancy, not ML at all. It's a thing called recently consumed. If you've used Reddit for a while, you probably remember a couple of years ago, you could come back to your feed multiple times throughout the day, and it was actually quite stale. So the idea here was not rocket science. Let's, when people come back, show them different things. So at first, this gave pretty modest wins. When I was joining the team, we had let the experiment run for a couple of weeks. It showed a little bit of lift in time on site, but nothing stellar. We had a PM join the team later. His name is Rhodes. He's still on our team. He went back and looked at the data. We had left the experiment running. And he noticed that over time, what actually was happening is that divergence between the control and the experiment group actually grew over time. So we saw people learning that actually, hey, I can come back to Reddit multiple times throughout the day and expect new content. So after a while, we started realizing this was actually a really, really big win, and we needed to ship it at some point. So there were still some concerns about scalability and how we would introduce it to the user base, so we kind of were hesitant. After all, there had not been really any major feed changes to Reddit in the past like 10 years, so Redditors being Redditors, they tend to be kind of critical people. I say that as a Redditor myself, so we knew we'd have to be careful when we shipped it. So that was sort of the first thing, and this is a part of the best feed as it is known now on the logged in site. The other one is a thing that became unfortunately known as person normalization. This was named by a guy on the team named Keith, a good friend of mine. The idea here is also simple. This is a little more data-driven. This is basically, let's take the subreddits you've interacted with recently, and when you come back the next day, we're going to boost up things that you've interacted with recently a little higher. So this also led to large increases in time on site. And while both of these things are going on, we as a team were talking a lot about ML and when we were going to do it, when we were going to actually start using it. And we figured, okay, person normalization can be kind of a stopgap for personalization for us until we get ML in place. And it should be easily replaced by ML, no problem, right? Maybe. Okay, so we've talked about both of those. Those are basically the best feed now. I like to make a lot of public, transparent posts about this on the site. But we haven't gotten into a lot of the technical details of how person normalization works. So don't bother processing this too much, but basically this is a dump of my events for a day. We structure all of our features in Cassandra in sort of a schemaless format so that we don't have to do a lot of migrations every time we want to load new features. And basically what you can see is the key is my username, family is the name of the feature, version is the date. This was for mid-November. And then the blob there we have, here's a simpler version that's a little more readable. We're basically keeping track of all of my interactions on a subreddit basis. So that T5 underscore in the Reddit world there just means it's a subreddit. And then we're taking a look at like how many votes I've had, how many expandos, or how many on the old site, how many images I made bigger, and screen views, like how many posts I went through and actually viewed. So what we do is we take that for every day. We take a 30-day window, and for each day we actually weight some of your events more strongly than others. So we say, you know, if you actually voted on something, that's probably a higher indication of interest than if you just did a screen view. If you submitted to a subreddit, you're probably a pretty engaged user. Expandos, actually, we don't have a strong signal there, so we're not really sure. And so we do that weighting. We take a log of that after we do the weighting, and finally we do a decay. So The decay factor is 1 over n, where n is the number of days that have passed since you had those interactions. So what this means is as you've had, your tastes are evolving over time, your feed is kind of like taking that into account as well. And if you don't come back for 15 days, we still do have some data for you. We can make a decent estimate. So yeah, just wanted to get into detail there just because I like being transparent about it, the way things works. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so that thus ends Act 1. That is sort of the big wins we've had. We're thinking about shipping these. We're thinking about how we're going to introduce them to users. Ultimately, that's in the format of the best feed. I wanted to call it the corporate feed. My colleagues didn't like that very much or think it was as funny as I did. So anyway, so end of late 2017, we're also talking about ML and how much we want to use it. So here's a picture of the team on the left, and the thing I want to call out here, getting back to the human element, is there's a piece of paper in the middle. And so as we're talking about ML and this fancy tech, I remember one day our engineering manager at the time said, I foresee us having logistic regression in production by October 1st. And my friend Raj, being the contrarian that he is, grabbed a piece of paper and he grabbed a Sharpie and he wrote down the deadline on a piece of paper and he put a sticky note because he had heard us talk about it so much and he was getting frustrated. And so we had a countdown at that point, and at that point it became very, very real. And I bring this up because I think this was actually the single most important thing that kind of like got us in gear, and it was the most motivated I'd ever seen at the time, the team getting together to work on this thing. So you can see me there changing the countdown. And this website is like burned into my brain because we would, it's easy to do math like subtracting one day at a time, but once a weekend passes, that math gets really complicated, especially on a long weekend. So you can pretty much forget about it. So getting more into the features we use. So we started with kind of a lot of features. We had our app name, so it's like, are you on the desktop, are you on the mobile web? We had day of week, we had hour of day. We had some link level features like content type. Is this an image, is this a video, is this a GIF? And we also had the subreddit name. So we didn't just have those features, we did a lot of interaction terms. So if you're not familiar, here's a dummy example. But basically we would have something like the time of day crossed with the subreddit so that our otherwise linear model could pull out more subtle features like, okay, maybe the news is more popular in the morning and maybe recipes is popular at night or something like that. And I don't even know if that's really an active subreddit, but. So for our training objectives, we started out a lot on click-through rate or interaction rate. This did not work well for us. What we ended up finding was this would push up a lot of very sugary content, easily consumed content, but it didn't lead to people spending much time on the site, which was our team's main goal at the time. So we tried, we didn't have a lot of information easily accessible on how much time people were spending, so our next objective function we tried was likelihood to comment, the idea being that this would be a proxy for deeper engagement. And this was the first time I think we saw a really significant lift from control. Unfortunately, we still were not at parity with person normalization, or p-norm as we call it internally now, because we've been stuck with it for so long. We were not able to actually match that with our ML. Later on, we moved on to actually ranking at the subreddit level, like person normalization does, and at that point, we're training directly on time on subreddit. This is the pipeline we use. I don't want to go into too much detail. This is already really dumbed down, but the key thing to note is that we were originally training in Spark and Scala, and we were serving in Python in a service called Minsky, which is just a custom service. So there was this sort of difference between serving and training that's really important. So issues that we ran into. Initially, we ran into a lot of performance issues, and I mean that in this sort of computational sense. Person normalization is re-ranking at the subreddit level. It's actually very quick to calculate in request. When you hit reddit.com, depending on how many subscriptions you have, you potentially have thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of candidates, and actually person normalization could adjust all of those candidates in real time and give you back a personalized experience. For logistic regression, however, we had a lot of link level features, and so that meant we could only really go into a small depth of your feed and re-rank that, and that made it the the impact that we could have with that a lot less. The other big issue and so we ended up re-ranking the subreddit level. So the other big issue that we ran into was around training serving split. So we were training in Scala, we were serving in Python. This meant we had to recreate a lot of the logic around feature hashing, feature crossing. We had to come up with a deploy pipeline, that sort of thing. And the two biggest issues, like fundamental technical things we ran into there, were around the endianness of our floats for our coefficients. So it turned out that the endianness of the dumped floats depended on the laptop of the person that was training on. Thankfully, we caught that before it went to production. Will caught that. And then the other big one was around our hashing. So we had a very sparse feature set with all that crossing with subreddit names, so we needed to use the hashing trick to limit the space at serving time, and we found that there was a discrepancy between the way we were doing that in training versus production. Also caught before experimentation, but it plays an important role later. So ultimately, bad news, we have not been able to get our ML in this area to get to parity with our dumb heuristic. So, Act 3, ML is dead and we give up. That's the end of the talk. I'm sorry. No, thankfully, actually, I did sign up for this before we got to this point, and there was always this sense that the win was right around the corner, and it never quite manifested. But the good news is, for me, in giving this talk, is that in the last few months, we have shipped a pretty big win for our popular. So, what we ended up doing was we trained a model on our popular, sort of a global model, not personalized to any individual user. And the idea here is we're going to try to predict time spent on post directly. This ended up pulling out a lot of comment-based features, and it led to very, very big wins in retention and time on site, the biggest ones that I've seen since I've been at the site. So if you've been following along, you'll see less of this sort of content. This dog or fox or whatever is like, I hate to pick on it, I think it looks quite nice, but is it really the most engaging thing that Reddit has to offer? I don't think so, and thankfully the model agrees. And so you'll see less of this type of stuff, this quickly consumed sort of shallower content. You'll see more like deep, meaningful discussion threads. So this is a random Ask Reddit thread that I saw when I was creating the slide. 16,000 comments, just like these random discussions about everything about life and slices of life and experiences that we all have that we sometimes don't even know other people are experiencing. And these threads get an order of magnitude more time spent than any other thread on the site, and I'm glad to see them now on the homepage because I think this really does showcase the best of what Reddit has to offer. How's it work? So this is a screenshot of the model as we're training it. It's a lot of neural networks, a lot of multi-armed bandits, a few random forests, ultimately going into a Rube Goldberg machine. I'm just kidding. It's actually just a linear regression. So it is a multivariate one. This is just a screenshot from Wikipedia nonetheless, but yeah, it is actually a very simple model that worked really well. And we trained it in a couple of days, and we shipped it within a couple of weeks. And that really worked well because it was a simple model. We didn't use a lot of really sparse features. It was very easy to train and easy to deploy. We just basically had a list of coefficients to put in. And yeah, like I said, the key also happens to be that we included features that were the big value prop for our site, which is the discussions. And we hadn't, for some reason, done that before. Okay, so what did we learn in this whole process? I would say keep it simple. So we started throwing the kitchen sink basically at our model worth of features. Conspicuously absent was our actual, the feature that led to our biggest wins with our heuristic, which was your subreddit interactions. In hindsight, I think what we should have done, and we all agree, is that we should have just started with the same feature and made sure that we could actually get it to parity. So if we couldn't even do that, how could we really have confidence in our pipeline or anything we're doing? Along the same lines, at the time, we decided to train in Spark and Scala because it was easily available, and all of our production serving infrastructure was in Python. We've since moved to TensorFlow. There actually didn't end up being a lot of problems. Like I mentioned earlier, those were basically it, and they were caught early. But if you're trying to go through the process of figuring out why your model is not performing, you really don't want this sort of specter in the back of your mind haunting you and saying, you know, is serving right? Do we have some weird subtle bugs there? So as much as possible, if you can avoid that, do so. Seriously, just try to avoid it. If you're getting started for the first time at your company, you think you're smart, you probably are, you can probably do it, but even if you can, you really don't want to have to be dealing with these subtle things. And I would say that with features as well. If you can train on the same feature set as you are in serving in production, do so. Another big learning, not as related to ML, but a broader learning, is sometimes experiments take a while, like with recently consumed. I think there's been a pattern in the industry of thinking that everything that you need to learn can be learned in a 1 or 2 week experiment, and sometimes that's not the case. Users are complicated people that have the capacity for learning, and we're working against habits that have been ingrained for the last decade at some time, so it might take longer than a week or two for you to really get important learning. Heuristics are not bad. The technology is really not the end goal in and of itself. If you already have something that's working pretty well, then maybe try a different product surface if you can't get your ML to work there, and don't just try to do it just for the sake of doing ML. Finally, you might be stuck with some names longer than you think. Don't use names like person normalization. I'm looking at you, Keith. He's not actually here, but I look forward to sending this to him later. So finally, the future of feeds here, or the future of feeds at Reddit. So as you probably gathered from this, we're still quite rudimentary in our ML at Reddit, so there's a lot of stuff to still build. And in some ways that's maybe a disadvantage, but in other ways I think we have an advantage in that we can learn from our peers and our competitors and the mistakes that they have made over the last decade. As I talk to some of them, I have heard similar stories about being overly myopically focused on a single metric, leading them to sort of lose the forest for the trees. They talk about, in one instance that I've heard is, they build recommender systems that were so complicated that they didn't really, no one person understood it internally, but the spammers had figured it out. So that's kind of a hard thing to get back from. The same company also told me that they had built recommender systems that had become so unpredictable to their users that their content creators started leaving for sites where they could actually expect that their users would see stuff when they published it. So it is important to remember that this stuff manifests over the course of years, and your individual experiments might not show this stuff. And so what I would like to do and continue doing at Reddit is being as transparent as possible, remembering that there are humans on the other end of our product, and the end goal is not the tech or the metrics, it's to actually build something good, and Reddit can be different from other social media sites. Thank you. We're hiring. My username, if you want to message me on Reddit, it's Daniel. You can talk to me around here. We're potentially open for remote work depending. I have an opening, a backfill on my team for myself. I'm managing the team now. Yeah, I don't know if I have time for questions. I assumed I used it all up. Oh, okay.